I'm coming to you live from the suburbs of Long Island, which is very exciting. And thank you all for joining me spending your Friday afternoon with us as we talk about the biggest and most interesting stories of the week. Today, before I start, I want to ask all of our viewers to make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that they can follow all the new videos that we post and get notifications. And if you haven't subscribed to The Real Deal and you find value in what we provide and the kind of content that we provide for you, please go to therealdeal.com and subscribe to our paywall so we can continue to do what we've been doing. Ed, we're going to start off with rent. Rent's always a big issue. People always email me and call me and ask me, Amir, do we still have to pay rent? And there's been so much back and forth. There's been so many flip-flops on evictions, or eviction courts open, or landlord-tenant courts open, that nobody really has a great answer. But if anybody is to have an answer, it would be our very own Georgia Cromray, who really is on top of this stuff. And Georgia, do we have to pay rent this month, or what's the deal?
So yeah, tenants still have to pay rent. But the usual way to enforce paying rent is by the threat of eviction. But housing court is still closed. Housing court is set to open on Monday, but there's been a lot of conflicting guidance, so it's not actually clear. Attorneys are arguing about it right now. They're not sure if evictions can even be filed, if there can be eviction proceedings, whether they can proceed virtually or not, because the court and the state have just given a whole lot of really confusing guidance.
Well,
So
that seems really bizarre to me. It seems like an easy enough thing where they can be like, the courts are open, we can do evictions, or hey, the courts are not open, we can't do evictions. There was already a lot of confusion in the landlord-tenant courts. It was already backlogged in a horrible way. I mean, you would literally go there and you would never see a judge. Basically, a clerk would be your judge, and they would push the cases along. And now you have another additional backlog of 3 months, or the last several months, when they put the evictions on hold. I mean, how are they prepared for this? I mean, how are they going to deal with all this backlog?
I think the consensus between landlord and tenant attorneys is that the state's court system is not prepared, and that they have not done a good job of setting out guidelines for how housing court is going to reopen. So there's a lot of frustration on both sides because of the lack of clarity. It's just not clear what's going to happen on Monday when housing court reopens, but they're not allowed to process evictions or even be in the building in some cases.
And I'm guessing the landlords are really pushing for this because it's
absolutely
because their mortgages haven't paused, right? They still have to continue
right.
with their mortgages. Everybody has their own sort of deck of lenders to get back to and sort of appease. But at the same time, the rents have paused in some ways, or evictions have, which gives them the only thing that gives them enforcement to collect rent.
Right.
And what percentage of tenants have been paying so far? Is there a number out there?
Yeah, so there have been a number of surveys. It's kind of hard to tell what is actually going on. As you can imagine, it's a sensitive subject. So a lot of landlords don't necessarily want to broadcast to the public that they are allowing their tenants to not pay rent or pay less rent, or they have deferral agreements. But one survey that was done earlier this week showed that 25% of tenants in New York City, residential tenants that is, did not pay any rent.
25% didn't pay their rent. Wow.
5%, which is a lot. Which I'd say
is that number higher than what it was in April and March, or is it steadily going up?
It's about the same. I think it's a little bit higher than May, a couple of percentage points higher. But it's interesting. It's a lot higher than the national average, which was only about 11% of tenants didn't pay rent over almost 12 million apartments this month. So it's pretty
11% across the country, and that's the best estimate that we have. So it's probably a lot higher than that.
Right. Probably, especially because the apartments that were surveyed are professionally managed apartments. They're market rate. They're not affordable or subsidized.
Right.
So the survey that was done in New York City was of smaller landlords who might have a variety of different subsidized apartments, might have lower income tenants, for example.
Well, I talked to a major landlord who has, over 10,000 apartments, and they said that they're really working with that's all they're doing right now, working with every tenant and trying to work things out, because a good percentage of, also when you have that many apartments, you're going to have people who've lost their jobs as a result of unemployment recently. And he says it's really important for us to continue to work with these guys. But he also said there's this sense of entitlement that people feel like, well, they just don't have to pay rent right now. And he was like, look, we have apartments that are $1,800 and we have apartments that are $30,000. And there are people who fall in between those lines and who can clearly afford to pay rent, but right now they're just choosing not to pay rent. Why do you think that thinking is even happening? If you can afford to pay rent, why pull back?
Well, I think that there's a lot of frustration from landlords that politicians have sort of been telling tenants not to worry about getting evicted right now. Now that is really set to kind of come to an end on Monday, because the eviction moratorium changes, and now the onus is on the tenants to prove that they have had some sort of coronavirus related financial distress. So you can't just say, I don't feel like paying rent and I'm not going to pay it.
How do you prove that? I mean, there's so many ways
That's
to say
great
that.
Question.
Like there's so much distress because I feel like everybody's been affected by COVID. So
I
feel like everything could fall under that category.
One attorney said this afternoon, is what if someone's mom dies and they have to care for her, and so they're not working during that time? Is that coronavirus related financial distress?
Yeah.
Who knows? There are a lot of unanswered questions.
I think that would fall under that.
Well, who knows? I think the courts are going to have to sort it out, but that's not happening so far because
Are you going to go to the courts on Monday to see what the chaos looks like?
I will absolutely not be going to housing court on Monday.
You don't want to talk to people on the front lines and see all the disarray?
I'll see what the lawyers who go say.
Well, super. Well, thank you so much. Great job on all this stuff. On covering this. I mean, like I'm literally everything you write, I'm reading because it's just amazing to see all the changes that's happening. And to be honest, even after reading all your articles, I still don't know what's going on. Because you literally write articles that say, "Oh, actually, the judge just changed their mind, or the governor just changed his mind about this," and they're going back and forth. And De Blasio and Cuomo aren't on the same page. So there's a lot of confusion. I am guessing that Monday is going to be hell in that housing court.
Yeah, I think it's going to be chaos. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Georgia. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to go to Catherine Kalargis, our lady on the ground in Miami, who did a really interesting piece on a residential real estate agent who is committing major fraud by using celebrity names and forging people's contracts and all sorts of stuff. Catherine, fill us in on that story. That was a really interesting story.
Sure. So alleged fraud.
Alleged fraud. Yes. Sorry. Shoot.
But basically, we got a tip about this this lawsuit that was filed by a residential advance company. So these companies that provided, they're basically like payday loans.
So basically, if I'm a real estate broker, I go to one of these companies and say, "Hey, I have these commissions that are going to close, but it's not going to happen for 6 months. Give me a loan and take an interest."
Right. So they take a cut once the money comes in. But basically, this advance company is suing this Douglas Elliman agent, Dedrick Copeland, for allegedly creating this scheme to pocket advances totaling more than $420,000 over the course of 2 years. And the allegation.
How did he do that?
So it was pretty crazy. I mean, the allegations that the lawsuit outlines states that he basically had like these. He had a fake buyer who he had multiple fake buyers who would sign these contracts.
Fake as in they didn't exist.
Well, in one case, he allegedly forged Shaggy's signature. The
Shaggy?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I was a fan.
And then in another case, he had somebody who was pretending to be a buyer. And the way he kind of pulled it off is he used the title agent to confirm to the residential advance company, like, yes, these closings are happening. They're just delayed.
Was the title agent in on it?
That's what that lawsuit alleges. Yeah. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
And who was the title company? It was the same title company?
Yeah, it was the same title company, same title agent, same law firm that actually no longer exists, which works
Wow.
out. Yeah, no, it was pretty crazy. I mean, and then at some point they brought in, so this agent brings in the residential advance company person who's been dealing with, and says, like, look, we want to start a fund with this buyer to invest in real estate in the US, and she has access to $100 million in cash and could be up to $2 billion in money from the Saudi royal family.
There's no reason for them not to believe the guy. He's with a reputable agency, right? He's bringing the client. He's done other deals. So on the other side, they had no reason not to trust this guy. What was his name again, the agent?
Dedrick Copeland.
Dedrick Copeland, okay.
The thing that's interesting too is that, like, he's been sued before, and he's had his license with Element for a while. And Element has actually been the target of, has also been named in another lawsuit with him. But they declined to comment. He's still.
Why didn't they get rid of him?
I don't know. I mean, it's unusual. Usually,
Yeah.
usually when we write about something like this, that's so big, an alleged fraud that's so big, the agent usually doesn't make it, with them.
Were you able to talk to the agent? Did you reach out to him?
Another thing that's weird is that he has, like, no social media presence. Unusual.
Oh, wow.
A real estate agent in Miami.
That's suspicious immediately. Right.
So, I mean, I called the last Douglas Elliman office that he was with, because that was the number that comes up online. And they, strangely couldn't find information for him, and said that maybe he's no longer with the that office. But
right.
He still has his license with Elliman. And he was, part of it is that he was allegedly using another brokerage firm to, like, on all the forms that the advance company provided. So I think that was one way to kind of keep Elliman in the dark.
So what was the name of that brokerage firm? Did it exist, or?
It did exist in the past. It's tied to a family member, and he's also apparently, like, an associate broker, but it doesn't seem to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
it just makes it, I mean, that much money, and with just forging a few signatures. I mean, Shaggy didn't physically show up, but there's so much trust.
Right.
That they just basically handed this guy over $400,000 that we know about. I'm sure, like, you don't come up with these schemes overnight. Like, I'm sure there's other stuff that's probably involved in this, allegedly. But so what's next? What's next for the story? Is there a court date?
I think that would be, a hearing would be next. Nothing is from the last time I checked has been filed. But I mean, there's still, like, an open lawsuit from a couple of years ago that.
And what was that lawsuit for?
That was where the sellers of a unit in Sunny Isles Beach, which is a very, like, wealthy area in South Florida, they sued him for basically allegedly stealing money that was intended to do a build out, to then list the unit and sell it. And instead, the lawsuit alleges that Copeland and I think another agent, just did damage to the unit, and they didn't sell it.
But they kept the money.
Right, and the money's
so
gone.
they didn't really renovate it.
Right.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, allegedly. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate that. Looking forward to definitely follow up on the story. Would love to hear what he has to say when he's facing the judge.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Have a great weekend, and thanks for all your great work.
Thank you.
Next, we have our man on the ground, Mr. Kevin Sun, who speaks 7-8 languages. Kevin, there you are. Kevin, you did a very interesting story. You took 55 Hudson, one of related most prominent buildings in Hudson Yards that Facebook is a tenant, and some other major tenants are in there, big bankers, big hedge funds. And you did a story breakdown of what each tenant is paying for rent. And I thought this was fascinating because I wondered, like, when all those tenants saw what everybody else was paying, what they thought, because there was a big range, in some cases people got higher floors and were paying less in rent, and they had less space. So like the formula, I couldn't come up. Like, what was the reason why some of these guys were paying 20% less in rent than, say, Facebook? And I don't know. Why don't you tell us about that story a little?
Right. So basically, to start with, just where I got this information from, it was from like basically when Related is developing Hudson Yards, but this specific building, 55 Hudson Yards, is primarily owned by the Japanese conglomerate Mitsui, I think.
Mitsui Fusan, right?
Yes, exactly. And they financed the building last fall with a loan that was securitized on the CMBS markets. And when you do that,
which was a brilliant thing for Related to do. I mean, they were they had so much, they were so exposed with the Hudson Yards, and for them to be able to take these different buildings and sort of sell them off as the project was going on, it was a great way to reduce their exposure. So with Mitsui Fusan coming in, 10 Hudson Yards, I believe, was always a commercial condo. So they managed to sell those floors off to Coach and all the other people who bought in there. And then as 30 was going up, 55 was going up at the same time, 55 Hudson Yards. And then when they found a buyer for that, it was a great boost for all of Hudson Yards. It showed the amount of confidence that not only Related in Oxford, but people from all around the world had in Hudson Yards at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, at 30 Hudson Yards, they recently also did like a sale leaseback thing with Warner Media. They brought in Allianz and like a big Arizona pension fund to like were the majority shareholders there. So yeah, it's interesting like how all the financing came together.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, specifically in the case of 55 Hudson Yards, basically, I mean, this big loan was made last fall and it's been packaged in a couple of different CMBS deals. CMBS were kind of frozen in the early days of coronavirus, but there's been some activity recently. So like there were some new reports that came out, and like one thing investors obviously want to know when they're buying these securities is like where's the cash coming from, who are the tenants, what are they paying? So that's been like a source of information for us. And yeah, basically this report had, well, in this case, not all the tenants, but like the top 10 tenants, which account for like 70-80% of the
if
rent,
not more.
Yeah. And most interestingly, it included Facebook, which signed a lease at the building like shortly before this loan came through. So they were like right on. If they had signed their lease a bit later, they might not have shown up in this.
Well, I also noticed that Facebook, who's getting more space than all of these guys, is getting lower floors, and they're paying, in some cases, they're paying 20-25% more than some of the other tenants in the building.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, also their lease ends much earlier than the other tenants. They're only there until 2024, whereas most of the others, I think, had expiries in the 30s. In the 2030s, but also,
so maybe that explains why they were paying so much more, because they have less years on that lease.
Possibly. Also, because Facebook, they signed like in total, I forget exact, but like 55 Hudson Yards was a small amount of the total space that they're taking up in Hudson Yards. They're mostly,
which is about 1.5 million square feet.
Right. They're mostly at 50 and I forget the numbers, 30 maybe Hudson Yards.
Yeah.
As well. So this was
not to mention Moynihan Station. That's like an avenue away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, you know what else I found interesting about that story is that all these big hedge funds, like Steve Cohen's SAC Capital and 72 Point and other major hedge funds took space in the building, and they all ended up paying more than the law firms. The law firms uniformly paid less than everybody else. And I think they're just so used to negotiating these things that they managed to get much better deals for themselves.
Yeah. And that was an interesting point, because at first I was like, okay, the hedge funds, like one of them is getting like the top floors of the building, so maybe there's a premium for that. But then, yeah, it's not quite like Facebook in particular. They're like pretty low. They're like halfway through the building, the 20th floor.
But they're paying they're paying the highest price at that point.
Right. So it's interesting, sort of, and it makes you wonder sort of how.
I think it's this kind of transparency. It's great for the market because it really allows people to find out what the value of space really is.
Right.
Are you going to be looking at more CMBS reports to like sort of break down rents for other buildings?
Yeah, it's been a great resource, and especially now that we have this TRD Insights vertical, it gives us like a place to like put this sort of data, and stuff like that,
which is only available for subscribers. So if you're not a subscriber, another great reason to become a subscriber for TRD Insights, where people like Kevin will break down building rents and create real transparency, for certain submarkets. Well, Kevin, that was a great story. I really enjoyed reading it. I especially like the fact that attorneys got the best deals in the entire building. I wonder if that's the case in every building, in every AAA building. But I look forward to the next one you do.
All right.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Have a great weekend, and thanks for all your great work. And to everybody else, thank you for tuning in, spending your Friday afternoon with us. And I'll see you next week. Thanks again. And please don't forget to subscribe for our YouTube channel. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.